Globally, the US and Canada have the highest numbers of refugee resettlement and therefore have had a generally good reputation for the treatment of refugees. Both countries have signed both the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1984 Convention Against Torture. Despite this, each of the countries' refugee and asylum seeker policy is letting them down at the moment and preventing them from protecting the rights of refugees. To begin with the US, we're going to look at the changes in and problems over the past few years. Changes in 2014 to prioritise family detention as a means of deterring asylum seekers have resulted in rising refugee detention numbers, with 44,228 asylum seekers were held in immigration detention, representing 77% of asylum seekers in court proceedings in 2014. More recently, the election of President Trump has resulted in changes that are detrimental to refugee rights. Within his first week of office, he had issued 3 executive orders. Executive orders mean they can bypass the Congress, and these 3 were on immigration. The first one was called Enhancing Public Safety in the Interior of the US. The second one was the Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvements. And thirdly, Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the US. This one was also colloquially known as the 7-country ban, as it banned refugees and travellers from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia, and Sudan and Iran, and put restrictions on travelling. Each of these countries, as you'll note, are majority Muslim countries. Other changes that have happened in America include the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the introduction of a zero-tolerance policy on those crossing the US border anywhere other than at official ports of entry, resulting in the prosecution of asylum seekers. This includes him ruling a Salvadorian woman who entered the US in 2014 fleeing an abusive husband did not qualify for asylum under US law, despite the fact that an immigration court had already granted her asylum. The decision means that the US can now turn away tens of thousands of women who arrive every year seeking safety from domestic abuse. He has also, in his role as Attorney General, limited the ability of asylum seekers to appeal decisions, restricted the judicial discretion for immigration judges, and used the Attorney General role to personally review immigration cases. Each of these changes, including the election of Trump and his executive orders, and the Attorney Jeff Sessions, result in detention of asylum seekers based on immigration law violations, like entering without documentation violates the US international commitments. Section 31(2) of the 1951 Refugee Convention states that a country may restrict the movement of refugees only when necessary. The consequence of this is that for example, in 2016, 73% of immigration detainees were held in private prison facilities, which are condemned for human rights violations, including a lack of adequate medical services and sexual abuse. In the last 2 years, there has been a sharp increase in the number of immigrant mothers and children subject to family detention. Asylum seekers are now detained purely on suspicion of violating federal or state law, including unauthorized entry, and this undermines the US's presumption of innocence. Being detained makes it more difficult to apply for asylum and access legal representation. Asylum seekers in detention are 5 times less likely to have legal counsel than those who are not detained, and asylum seekers without legal representation are almost 5 times less likely to win their case. Without legal representation, asylum seekers are generally unaware about the 1-year filing deadline required to apply for asylum. Between 1998 and 2009, 53,400 people were denied asylum based on the filing deadline. Imagine how much this is going to increase now that more people are detained. Turning back asylum seekers from Mexico violates the US's commitment to non-refoulement under Article 33 of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Foreign nationals arriving in the US from Mexico without deportation are deported. It's been established that US officials fail to adequately screen asylum seekers for fear of return before ordering them deported.